Now to an issue that DW is covering across the day, gender-based violence. According to the United Nations, every hour 5 women are killed by members of their own families. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The UN is launching 16 days of activism aimed at raising awareness of what it says are alarming rates of femicide, where women or girls are murdered because they are women or girls. The UN says 45,000 women were killed by family members last year alone. The highest number was in Asian countries, followed by Africa, but it's a threat facing women around the world. In Germany, around 1 in every 7 women experience rape or sexual assault in their lifetimes. But few instances are reported because victims fear they will not get adequate help from the police. And if cases do come to court, only a fraction end in a conviction. Now an initiative has been launched to help reinforce cases against perpetrators of sexual violence.
It happens every day. Sexual assault, rape, or severe injuries caused by gender-based violence. Almost 10,000 cases were recorded by German police last year, but many cases likely go unreported because the perpetrator is often a partner or ex-partner and the scene of the crime is often their home.
When, for example, something of this nature occurs in a family, an instance of domestic or sexual violence, then people are afraid of destroying social structures, of disturbing the family peace. If it is reported, then that can cause huge problems within a family or within existing social circles. So people say, I'll just leave it.
Evidence of a sexual assault, such as sperm, DNA on clothing, or photos of injuries, must be secured as soon as possible. That happens automatically when there is a police report. But survivors of rape often just want to forget what happened, and that can mean destroying all traces of the perpetrator. In the eastern German state of Brandenburg, as well as in other German states, more and more hospitals have been taking a different approach for several years now. Without involving the police, those affected can have themselves examined confidentially and anonymously by a gynecologist or a urologist. Hospitals have forensic medical tools to secure evidence, including clothing, DNA or photographs. That evidence is kept on file for 10 years. At the same time, the women are offered immediate medical assistance and are put in touch with victim counselling centres.
This system is useful in cases of re-traumatization, so when the whole thing happens again. The first time and even the second time it happens, I may not have wanted to report it, but maybe the third time I do want to. Then it is possible to access old cases, so to speak, in the current context.
Fewer cases of rape in Germany are reported than in other European countries. Perpetrators often get off scot-free. The project wants that to change, even if survivors only have the courage to go to the police much later.
And there's lots to talk about on this day. For that, I'm pleased to welcome Aleida Luján Pinelo. She's the co-founder of feminicidmap.org in Berlin, a group of voluntary researchers collecting data on gender-based killings. Ms. Luján Pinelo, welcome to DW. As with all gender-based violence, the problem with femicides is that they are heavily underreported, isn't it? How do you go about collecting your data?
Yes, exactly. It's well, thank you for having us here. And we are not only based in Germany, we are an online project. So many of us are abroad, but some of other members are also in Berlin. So the problem is, first, the problem is not recognized, and therefore there is no data and is not reported as feminicide as such. Therefore, we collect data from newspapers. That's our main source of information. We get to these cases through Google Alerts, and then we process the cases that we get every day through this tool.
How many cases have you been able to document this year so far?
This year so far, we have collected 181, but we have to clarify that we register all killings of women and feminicides, because we want to see also like what are the other patterns of killing. So it's not only about feminicides, but feminicides we have recorded so far 125. And to clarify also, we consider feminicide not only as intimate feminicide. For intimate feminicide cases, we have registered so far this year 86 cases.
And that would be at the hands of a partner or a former partner?
Yes, usually intimate feminicide is defined as established a couple that had a sort of relationship.
Okay, this is a tremendously important task you're carrying out, but shouldn't the government be doing this?
Yes, but it's like it has happened it happens in many other countries because the government, first of all, don't recognize the problem. It is the work of activists or civil society's work that perform this, because it is us, the ones that are suffering, and also the ones that want to find solutions to this. So yeah, it should be definitely the state. But when the state not even recognizes the situation as a problem, as is the case with Germany, that for many years it hasn't recognized it at all, then that's the first problem that we are challenging.
And to what extent is this an issue of framing? You say it's not really recognized as a problem. In Germany, for instance, domestic femicides are often treated as a private matter rather than a broader societal issue.
Yes, I think there are two things in these questions. The first one is like the framing and the importance of naming these crimes as such, because, for instance, the German government has, for instance, denied to collect data on feminicide under the excuse that since it is not a criminal category in Germany, therefore they don't have the power to record the numbers, and also because the Istanbul Convention does not address concretely feminicides, they also kind of excuse of not registering these cases, which from our perspective is not even an argument. And the other one is like framing feminicides or domestic related killings, that I will call it intimate feminicides, as an individual problem is also a problem, because then you erase the structural and societal aspect of the problem. It is true that is also there is responsibility from the individual, but also from the society. When we as a society accept this problem or justify the problem, say like, okay, it's because this woman was in a relationship with this person, or it's because this woman accepted the violence in the first place, it's her fault, then this is the societal aspect that researchers in feminicide are speaking about.
Aleida Luján Pinelo of feminicidemap.org, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And impunity for the perpetrators of gender-motivated violence is especially high in the context of war and armed conflict. The United Nations says between 10 and 20 cases go unreported for every case that is documented. The latest available figures from 2021 show more than 3,000 documented cases of sexual violence during conflicts, but the UN says the true figure is more likely 30 to 60,000 or even higher. Let's bring in Christina Lamb. She's an award-winning British journalist and the chief foreign correspondent for the British newspaper, The Sunday Times. She's also published 10 books, including Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, What War Does to Women, an account of how violence against women is used as a weapon of war around the world. Ms. Lamb, welcome to the day. We talk a lot about missiles and bombs when we talk about weapons of war, but sexual violence is older than all of them combined. What role does rape play in war and conflict?
Well, there's always been rape in war. I mean, if you go back to ancient Greeks and Persians and Romans, there was always rape. But what we've seen in recent years is much more the use of rape as a weapon of war, where soldiers, militias are instructed to deliberately go and rape the women.
And it's not only rape, though, right? It's also sexual slavery, forced marriage, forced pregnancy. What does all of that do to women and girls?
Well, unfortunately, the reason that we're seeing it happen so much, and I mean, if you just look back the last 8 years, there's so many cases. You look at what happened to the Yazidis in Iraq, enslaved by Islamic State fighters, the Rohingya people in Burma or Myanmar, who the Burmese military came into their villages and gang raped the women, and also women in Nigeria, like the Chibok girls who were taken from their school in the middle of the night, abducted by Boko Haram fighters. Just the tip of the iceberg. That was happening to tens of thousands of women in the region. So, there are hundreds of thousands of cases. There's really an epidemic of it. But the fact is that, unfortunately, it's a very effective weapon. If you want to terrorize a population, humiliate them, make them leave an area, it is a very effective way of doing it. And it's also very cheap. One militia said to me, it's cheaper than a Kalashnikov bullet.
Mm-hmm. You have extensively reported from Ukraine since Russia's invasion. How widespread is rape in this war?
When I first started getting reports early on in the war from female activists in Ukraine, I really found it hard to believe. I didn't think that the Russians would be doing that. But then soon, there were so many reports, it was clear that it was happening on a wide scale. And when the Russians left Bucha and Irpin around Kyiv, I went and talked to people in those areas, villages around, and heard many really shocking reports from women of what the Russians had done. And a lot of people are reluctant to report it, but it certainly happened and it continues to happen. I believe they're on a large scale, and it's very reminiscent of what the Red Army did in Germany, actually, at the end of the Second World War. During the liberation of Berlin, when they came in and raped a really large number of women.
Yeah. The ICC has prosecuted only 2 cases of rape in its 22 years. That added to the fact that Russia is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. How big are the chances that the people ordering and carrying out these atrocities will be brought to justice at some point?
Well, this is the real problem. I mean, rape in war is an international war crime, but it is the most neglected war crime. And accountability, as you just mentioned with the ICC, at the moment is the exception, not the rule. Almost no perpetrators are brought to book for what they have done. But the one sort of positive, if you could say that about Ukraine, is that there, for the first time, has been really widespread reporting on the issue, and there's a lot of outrage. And the international community is very active. The International Criminal Court have got people working there. President Zelensky has spoken about the rape in the same breath as the torture and killing, whereas too often in conflicts we've seen rape kind of regarded as a side issue, as somehow not so important to be prosecuted as other things that are happening. So I think, maybe, just maybe, this might be a sort of turning point where people really take it seriously in a way that hasn't been before.
What, to me, and I think after reading your book to you as well, is very disturbing is how quickly these atrocities are committed when there are no social and disciplinary restraints guiding our coexistence, that the darkness seems to lie very closely under the surface. How do you explain this, the flipping of the switch in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find a conflict where it hasn't happened. So it does make you wonder, if people are in this situation, men, because it is almost always men that are carrying out these acts, is there something latent that leads them to do this? But I think the real problem, and all of the women that I spoke to, survivors, the one thing that they all really want is justice. And that doesn't necessarily mean seeing the perpetrator in court. It might mean just acknowledgement of what has happened to them, because perhaps the most heartbreaking thing about all of this is this is a crime where the victim is often made to feel that they've done something wrong and that they are then ostracized from their community, not able to talk about what happened to them. Just as in Germany at the end of the Second World War, many of the women committed suicide rather than actually talk about it. To this day, that situation continues. And even in Ukraine, not that many people actually have really officially reported to the prosecutor. People have spoken to the hotlines, but they haven't made official reports.
Journalist and author Christina Lamb, pleasure speaking to you tonight.
Thank you.
Sexual harassment in public spaces is also a problem for women and girls around the world, including in Mexico. Women there are also frequently subject to coercive control from their male partners. In one district of Mexico City, activists are getting organized with street patrols to raise awareness of these problems.
For over a decade, Rosario's husband controlled every aspect of her life. Her finances, when she could leave the house, even which clothes she was allowed to wear. The abuse almost drove her to suicide. Her story is all too common in Mexico, where 3 out of 10 women suffer psychological violence.
It even affected my physical appearance. I didn't care anymore how I dressed or if I bathed, because my husband would ask me why I dressed up or why I took a bath. He was very jealous.
Rosario went to an official refuge for survivors of violence in Mexico City, where she lives. The local government has built 13 of the houses, which have helped over 8,000 women in the past year alone. But it's not always easy to ask for help. Some women are afraid their neighbours will see them enter a safe space and mark them as victims. This district organises daily street patrols to discourage stigmatisation and raise awareness of institutions that protect women. The environment is also part of the problem. The authorities have improved street lighting on several main avenues to create safe paths for women. Nearly 3/4 of all harassment and other sex crimes happen in the street and on public transport. Almost half of Mexican women say the fear of sexual violence has made them stop taking walks, visiting relatives and friends, or even going to school.
One man was masturbating right in front of me. Others brush up against you when they walk past. We can ask for help, but no one does anything. One time I became paralyzed with fear, and now I can't take the subway by myself. I'm afraid I could freeze again at any moment.
Violence against women is recurrent and widespread, but Rosario is using her voice to fight it, so her 12-year-old daughter can live freely.
For more, I'm very pleased to welcome Anita Bhatia. She is the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women and joins us now from New York. Thank you so much for taking the time. According to a recent report that you've published, the biggest threat to women is posed by the men that they know well. It's often the men that they live with. What needs to change so that men stop assaulting and killing the women in their lives?
Well, as you noted, most perpetrators of what we call intimate partner violence are men. So actually, we have to start with the men, and we have to start educating them. But more importantly, we have to start to change attitudes and cultural norms and behaviors which normalize this. The issue is that society has a very high tolerance for violence against women. So unless we change people's attitudes and they begin to see this for the crime that it really is, nothing much is going to change.
So how do you go about doing that? And what would your message be, for example, for the men who are watching this interview right now?
Well, first of all, I would say it is a human rights violation. So violence against women, any kind of violence, is actually not just abuse, it is a human rights violation. So if you are indulging in that kind of behavior, you are violating that woman's human right. The second thing that I think is really important is that we have to keep advocating for the importance of tackling this issue as a public policy priority. The problem is that for most governments, this isn't a big enough priority. Yes, on days like the International Day to End Violence Against Women. You will have public figures speak up about it today. They'll speak up about it over the next 16 days because we have a campaign for 16 days. But it has actually got to be something that's discussed in government, in cabinet, and it has got to rise to the level of a national priority so that there are resources allocated to it, and it is something that is viewed as a universal problem and not just an individual household problem that has to be faced by the woman who's the victim of abuse.
And the UN has recognized that the overall number of femicides has remained largely unchanged over the past decade. What is going wrong there?
Well, there are a couple of things happening. First, as I said, society has really normalized violence against women. People are no longer shocked enough about it to want to take action. The second thing that's happened is that during the pandemic, there was a huge exponential rise in violence against women. And it became visible during the pandemic. Our Secretary General called it the shadow pandemic. But post-pandemic, those rates of violence continue to remain high. And the third thing that has happened in the last couple of years is that the number of conflicts in the world and the number of countries in the world where there is a huge pushback against women's rights has gone up. So whether it's Afghanistan or Iran or what's happening with the conflict in Ukraine, you see women suffering because they are in the front lines of either conflict or protesting against oppression of their rights. And so that is associated with a rise in the rates of violence.
Okay, so these are intertwined issues requiring urgent responses. Anita Bhatia, I want to thank you so much for joining us on DW News to speak about these issues.
My pleasure. Thank you.